In today's video, I'll be providing my final thoughts on this entire Brendan Schaub exposed saga. If you're unfamiliar with everything that's happened up until this point, definitely go check out my playlist where I've been documenting each part of this journey every step of the way. But if you're already familiar, let's get right into my recap of my final thoughts on this entire situation, starting with the man of the hour, the one and only Brendan Schaub. It's no secret that Brendan is the center of all of this drama and the main reason why any of this is even being talked about right now, as from beginning to end, he handled this incredibly poorly, and from a PR standpoint, he easily could have just laid low and avoided this becoming a public spectacle, but he couldn't lay low and instead insisted on being the aggressor and going after his so-called friend Bobby Lee and his girlfriend Khalyla. I really feel like his Tigerbelly accusations were his way of trying to distract the internet from the revelation that came out of that Trash Tuesday podcast that he was definitely at least trying to be unfaithful to his wife in previous years. But if anything, him becoming the aggressor really didn't distract the internet at all and instead made the internet more focused and more aware of those initial accusations. For example, I literally created my YouTube channel after that H3 podcast because I had to comment on it. I literally couldn't hold back because I had already been following that situation. But if he would have laid low and handled this better, the internet would have been way less aware of this entire situation than they are now as a result of his actions. I'll mention again here that he hasn't apologized for any of his actions, aside from saying kind of in a blanket statement that he didn't handle this well, which is obvious, right? There were a ton of opportunities where he could have apologized further, and especially to Bobby Lee and Khalyla, like when they had mentioned that he texted Bobby Lee and threatened that he wasn't afraid to come after comedians and that he had hired a $500,000 lawyer and that he has friends in dark places and these type of things. Brendan just nodded and agreed and didn't deny that he said these things, but didn't show an ounce of regret or anything like that. So it really just painted him in a bad light and left a bad taste in my mouth and the mouth of any viewer of that podcast who has at least some type of critical thinking ability. He even had the guts to say that he didn't want an apology from Bobby Lee and Khalyla, and the truth is there's literally no reason why they would need to apologize in this situation. Any type of apology would have to come from Brendan Schaub himself, or of course Bryan Callen. And speaking of Bryan Callen, one lie that Brendan was caught in that Tigerbelly podcast is he said that Bryan wasn't privy to any of that evidence that was in that supposed 300-page document, but then subsequently off air, once the podcast was over and there was no audience listening, he did admit that the HTML screenshots that he had actually came from Bryan Callen, which is just such a boneheaded admission when on air he was like, no, there's no way that Bryan Callen had any of that info, but it was corroborated that Bryan Callen in fact had some of that info and was sharing it to other podcasters and other comedians to further try to attack Bobby Lee and Khalyla. And now let's transition into talking about Bryan Callen, because I think I've said everything I need to say about Brendan Schaub in this situation and that he was 100% in the wrong and his apologies weren't adequate. So let's talk about Bryan Callen. Again, after that Tigerbelly podcast, Brendan confirmed that Bryan Callen actually sent him those HTML screenshots, which is such a bad look for Bryan Callen because I initially thought he was only really involved with this drama in that phone call to Bobby Lee where he bullied him and threatened him, but it turns out that in fact he was more involved, which is not good. Obviously, Bryan's aggression in that phone call was totally uncalled for and clearly traumatized Bobby, which is honestly just sad. The fact that he was sharing quotation mark evidence with other podcasters sheds an even darker light on him in this situation because he went above and beyond just bullying Bobby in that phone call. With all of the info that's now out in the public, I really think that Bryan Callen isn't complicit in all of this and definitely deserves some of the blame here. And I continue to echo that in my previous recap of Bryan Callen's apology, I think I was too easy on him because he only really apologized due to being backed up in a corner and having no other real options and to try to save face. And it really feels like he just took the hit for Brendan in this situation. They thought simply having Bryan making an apology would help sweep all of this under the rug. But with all of the info that's come out, I don't think that's the case. And now both of them look pretty bad. And any sliver of respect that I had for Bryan Callen before this drama, which was a very small amount to begin with, is definitely gone now after this entire situation. And now that the ugly part of this video is over with, talking about Brendan Schaub and Bryan Callen, I'll move on to talk about Bobby Lee and Khalyla, starting with Khalyla and my thoughts on how she handled this entire situation. It'll come to no surprise to you all that I think Khalyla handled this situation beautifully. She was the key factor in why all this information came to light in the public eye. Her timeline of events in the Tigerbelly podcast really helped tie everything together from a viewer's perspective, and it was much appreciated on my end as someone covering these events. Following along with this story on Reddit and on YouTube, it was really insane how much hate and harassment Khalyla actually received. Khalyla received a ton of hate and a lot of misogynistic comments, which is always just awful to see, especially in the 2020s. These types of comments really shouldn't be so common, but people were upvoting those type of comments, and it even trickled into my YouTube videos, which I just hate to see. If you're on the misogynistic side, definitely don't subscribe to my channel because you're not welcome here, and I would encourage you to think critically about those beliefs and really just try to grow as a human. But now with that out of the way, let's talk about my final thoughts on Bobby Lee in this situation. I really just feel bad for Bobby Lee having to go through all of this. It was pretty clear from the beginning that he didn't want any of this to be public, but once the cat was out of the bag, I think he realized it's gone too far and now he kind of had to talk about it. And I really hope he doesn't blame himself for any of this, because he truly is a victim in this entire situation, and how he was treated by his so-called friends, Brendan Schaub and Bryan Callen, was truly despicable, and I just feel for him that he had to deal with this. But if I can go half glass full for a moment, I really think that in the long run, Bobby Lee isn't going to be impacted by these accusations, because they really were just accusations and nothing ended up being true based on the evidence that we've seen so far. And it's pretty obvious that the Slept Kingdom is behind him and that even other podcasters are behind him in this situation. So I really do think that Bobby Lee is going to be fine here, and that Brendan Schaub and Bryan Callen should be more worried about their reputation after all of this. But again, my heart just goes out to Bobby and Khalyla for having to deal with this. And I think that wraps up my final thoughts on this entire situation. If there are any more developments to this story, I'll definitely keep you all posted, but at this point I feel like it's all pretty much over and I'm not sure that any new information will come out. But you can definitely expect more videos from me in the future, not about Brendan Schaub, because this channel isn't just going to be a Brendan Schaub hate channel like you all might be thinking right now. I'll definitely be covering different types of internet situations that catch my eye. So if you enjoyed any of my videos so far, definitely make sure to like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. But that's going to be it from me today, everybody, so take it easy. Peace.